Welcome to Politics Personified, an IG Live series presented by the Personified Group. In today's episode, we will chat with newly elected State Representative Ruwa Romman in Georgia's 97th District. We'll chat about Ruwa's experience as a newly elected representative, as well as being the first Muslim woman elected to this position. Let's get started.
Hi, how are you this evening?
I am great. I have been taking the bus home, so I get to catch up on stuff on my way, and it's been awesome.
Oh, that's super cool. I didn't even know that was an option.
Me neither until
Okay.
this week, so you and me both.
That is super cool because, transportation is such a huge issue down here. And so to hear that, that's very enlightening. And thank you, everyone, Ruwa's friends, family, supporters, for joining us tonight. This is Politics Personified, and I'm Melita Hampton. I am the host of Politics Personified, brought to you by the Personified Group. So this evening, we have newly elected Georgia State House Representative Ruwa Romman,
Hi.
right? And she is the first Muslim woman elected into Georgia State House of Representatives. So we are so honored to have you kick off our 2023 Politics Personified. So we are not going to belabor you. I know you have a long day with, State House representative business. And it's a very exciting time and a very exciting season for you. And so I'm so proud of you and congratulations to you. I've watched your campaign, watched you out there in the trenches, and just watch you support, others as well that's gone before you. So this is well deserved. So congratulations. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we're going to jump right in. So Ruwa, I know we have some people that are connected to you that are, live tonight with us, but tell those who are not familiar with you, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that you relocated to the States when you were about 7 years old from Palestine, but just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so good place to start. Very long time ago now, but I came here when I was 7 years old. I'm 29 now. And my family actually moved to Georgia, so we've been here ever since then, which was around 2001. And went to public school here, some time in Fulton County, some time in Forsyth County. But my family has owned a business in Gwinnett County for almost 25 years now, so it's been a long time. And what was so interesting about that experience was that it sort of shaped everything I've done since then, because it's exposed me to a lot of Georgia, frankly, because I graduated from South Forsyth High School, and from there I ended up going to Oglethorpe University, where I actually ended up as a politics major, and then English minor and philosophy minor. I always have to think about that because I remember I switched a lot, so between those three. And then I got recruited by some nonprofits. At the time, I was already working for the Center for Civil and Human Rights. I was actually there during their opening, which was awesome. Giving the late Congressman John Lewis's tour of that center was probably one of the most incredible, surreal experiences of my life, because I was just showing him around a building and he was telling me all the history. And I felt like, I ended up really grounded in that. The first time I ever did anything political was in college. We had Michelle Nunn, Jason Carter campaign come down and teach us how to knock doors. But I was like, I'm going to stay in the nonprofit space for a little while. And then, during the Trump presidency, I was recruited by, at the time, candidacy and then presidency, by the Council on American Islamic Relations Georgia chapter. They were just starting out. There was unfortunately a lot of anti-Muslim sentiments, policies, etc., and it was just unfortunately a necessity. And then I went to get my master's in DC and moved back 2 years ago. So, here I am now. I did not intend on running for office. I'm sure a lot of you here have kind of heard this, but it was all kind of very much accidental. And but yeah, it all worked out in the end, and we're now in week 3 of session.
Right. Okay. So listen, you must have been looking at my sticky notes, because that was one of my questions. So, I am a personal brand strategist. So I focus on people, developing their personal brand and telling their story. And there's a story behind every brand. So there's a story that you just recently shared with us behind your brand, why you do what you do. But I do have to ask, because I don't know that story,
Sure.
Ruwa.
Yeah.
Why did you run for State House Rep?
So first and foremost, I've always believed in local government. I spent, like I said, about 3 years in DC, and it really taught me the importance of having voices that know who they're representing and are deeply connected to their communities. And then that isn't to say that people in Congress are completely disconnected. It just simply means that you have to be very intentional about it. And
Mhm.
DC can really suck people in. So during COVID, my husband and I moved back. We wanted to be closer to family. We're both the oldest in our families, and it was really important for us to be near them.
Mhm.
And I remember we were trying to figure out where we wanted to live, and we ended up deciding on Duluth because it was equidistant between Cumming and where my husband grew up and graduated, which was Lilburn. And
Okay.
so that's how we ended up, quote unquote, in this district.
Okay.
It wasn't like us looking at a map and going, I'm going to run for office here, especially because even if I tried to, these maps were completely destroyed last year. So
We know that.
so we moved back. I helped out with campaigns. I helped out with the John Ossoff and Warnock campaign. My friend and I co-founded the Georgia Volunteer Hub because we saw our organizer friends so overwhelmed by the attention they were receiving, and we thought, how do we train these volunteers so that they are volunteer ready when they go to these organizations? And so we focused a lot on sort of education, helping people who are new to Georgia understand Georgia. And so that was sort of a lot of the political work I was doing. Again, my passion is organizing behind the scenes. Like, I think, my husband likes to say that I tend to end up in the spotlight, but frankly, genuinely, it's not intentional. And then a friend of mine at Georgia Muslim Voter Project said, hey, we're doing a training for Muslim women, but particularly predominantly excluded Muslim women and minority women so that they can learn how to do this work. Can you attend the
Right.
training and let us know if we missed anything? And I said, yeah, sure. It was like an hour on Zoom on a Saturday. Phenomenal. Why not? So shout out to the Georgia Muslim Voter Project for that. But a reporter was there, and so she was asking me, why is it important for Muslim women to get involved?
Right.
And I remember actually talking about, like, would I be interested in running for office? I was like, no, especially now. Like, I'm in a really intense part of my career. This isn't really in the cards. Like, my plan for last year, honestly, was to run a marathon, and then during the fall, help political campaigns in Georgia. Like, that was sort of where I wanted to be. And at that point, I was like, I could take a sabbatical from work. It could be what I do for the fall.
Right.
It was so funny because that reporter did release her article a few months later, and it started with Ruwa Romman is considering or contemplating a run for office or something like that. It was
I
like
think
the
you were
first
gonna say that. Yeah.
and it was crazy because that article dropped on my husband and I's anniversary, which was around Christmas, and the Muslim community does not celebrate Christmas. So I had all these people who had nothing better to do off on vacation who were like, you should run for office. And I said, I should
Wow.
not run for office. Um, but thanks to their support, like I said, I'm not a fundraiser, I'm an organizer. But thanks to their support, we were able to fundraise almost $250,000 in less than a year. We were able to knock
Good.
over 15,000 doors. We were able, I mean, I had staff who nobody made less than 20 an hour on my campaign by the end of the campaign. Yeah, we started out at 17.50 and we upped it to 20 with a gas stipend just because things were getting so crazy. But we got a chance to run the gold standard of campaigns, and I'm incredibly proud of what we did. And I remember thinking, regardless of what the outcome would have been, there was nothing more we could have done. And I think to me that was such an important lesson at the time.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate that story. It's so ironic, because when I did my research on you and I said, all right, you studied politics, right? So naturally, this was a natural progression. But we always know there's a story, and I wanted to know the juice. I wanted to know the dirt. Give me the tea, Ro, and give me the tea.
And for the record, I think in terms of like career options, there's actually so much to do in politics, especially now because unfortunately there's so much money in politics. You can be a graphic designer, you can be a field director, you can be a comms director, there's literally so much you can do that isn't being the candidate, right? For example, working on the Hill, you can be a policy director, you can be a chief of staff. There's genuinely so much you can do within politics that isn't the candidacy itself. Not to mention, government work is so important. I mean, I had the opportunity to work with some of the best public servants ever, and I am so appreciative. I know a lot of people are like, government sucks. and sometimes rightfully so. But I've also found so much potential within government. And so that was originally that was sort of my thought process, was that was the side of it that I would end up on.
Okay, yeah, I totally agree with you. I spent a stint in DC myself before I moved down to Atlanta. And believe it or not, we have a lot in common. So I was in DC to be a press secretary on the Hill.
Oh
So
my God.
I
Yes.
yeah, so that was absolutely my path. I studied political management in grad school, and when I really learned more about what goes on behind the scenes, I said, no, 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 that's not the life for me. I want to be behind the scenes. I want to tell the story, right? I want to tell the story. So, but then at this time, and I have some years on you, Ro, okay?
You don't look it at all.
I appreciate it. Don't let the fresh face fool you. So at that time, the salary was it wasn't $20 an hour, it was not. And I said, I can't afford to live in my car just to be, your press secretary. But it was like a dream job, right? So I let that go, and I ended up moving down to Atlanta, and now here we are, 16 years later. And now I'm, operating in my own brand, right? And able to help people tell their story in my own light, in my own way, help elected officials, community advocacy groups, and so forth, and just regular everyday individuals. So I'm like, I get to write my own story now. But I do understand your passion and your connection, and you're like, hey, listen, you can have an impact on your community without being in the forefront, right? Without your face being stamped in the front. So I absolutely get that. Had to share that part of my story because I totally.
And to your point, I mean, honestly, staff, I think people think I exaggerate when I say this. Staff run the show. I mean, if you think about it, members of Congress, as an example, don't have time to read everything, meet with everybody, do everything. It's their staff that, if you've got good staff, you can be an incredibly successful person.
Yeah.
And if you don't have good staff, or you're a bad manager, or you don't take care of your people, you're not going to get very far in this, no matter how good your brand is. And to your point, that's the unfortunate thing about politics, and why it was so important for me to pay people well, is unless you have a support network that will pay and give you financial support, it's really hard to break into this, because a lot of internships are unpaid, or at least at the time they were. A lot of opportunities are like stipends or fellowships, and DC is expensive, and now Atlanta's expensive, and
I'm telling you,
yeah.
It's expensive. So I'm so glad to see the progression and the change, because I reflected on it, over the course of years after marriage, children. It's like, yeah, I was going to work on Capitol Hill, but I decided I wanted to have a family. And so, I gave that up. But it's just so ironic how it came back in due season, right? And now I get to, help behind the scenes, help people tell their story. So, but yes, I absolutely can relate to that, and just happy to see the progression, right? So, progression. Let's talk about that. What does it mean to you to be the first Muslim woman elected to Georgia State House Representative? That's progression.
Totally. And it's a huge responsibility, in particular because the Muslim community is incredibly diverse. There's so many stakeholders, so many different communities. For example, not all Muslims live in the metropolitan area. You've got Muslims in Augusta and Savannah. And so even though I represent parts of West Gwinnett, it's almost like I now represent so many more people. And you can see Imam Arshad Anwar is actually one of the awesome imams in the community that I'm a part of. And so it's like interesting, because the other piece of it is now I almost feel like I'm that entire community's representative, not in a way of like I speak on their behalf, but I've now become a resource they didn't have before.
Right.
And me and my colleague Farouk are, now becoming the go-to people of how do I do this, learning about the political process, showing people how all of this works in the background has been really, really important. And also, I also want to give a shout out to my friend Aisha Yaqub, who originally ran in my district 4 years ago, 2 cycles ago. And it was actually this district, just differently drawn at the time. And even before she ran and when she ran, I was like, there's no way that a visibly Muslim woman could run and win for office in Georgia. And if it was anybody was going to, it was going to be her, right? And so to have that progression of there's no way that will never happen to now having 4 Muslim people in the state legislature, and on top of that, for us to get to be our authentic selves, I think is a really big deal.
To show up as your authentic self, that is amazing, amazing. So I am so glad that you mentioned that. That is absolutely critical, and that's a piece of developing your personal brand, showing up as your authentic self. So like I said, I'm very proud of the progression overall in this country, and then even in the southern state. I consider Georgia my southern state now. So yes, absolutely. So I said, this is so commendable, and I know that it's like you're a Barbie, right? Like, okay, she's representation. Now these little Muslim girls can grow up and be motivated and encouraged that I too can hold this position. And so I know that means a lot for your community. It means a lot for all communities because it's showing diversity, it's showing progression. We keep using that word tonight. It's showing progression. And it's so important and it's so needed for this country overall to move forward, not just within the state of Georgia. So I did read this article on behalf of your graduate alma mater, Georgetown University.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so they made a reference of, some of your talking points, but specifically, you mentioned in this interview that you want to put public service back into politics. Tell us, what does that mean?
Totally. This was a play on the sort of motto and vision for what's called geopolitics. It's their political institute at Georgetown that is for, both undergrads and graduate students. They brought in political figures to come for a semester and talk about their experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it was literally at the time the catchphrase was public service is a good thing, politics can be too.
Mm-hmm.
And my play on that was I wanted to put public service back into politics because the reality of the situation is, and this is something I'm still getting used to, is that as a state legislator, I now have access to more resources than the average person.
Right.
And those resources include, like, I have a government liaison at different agencies within Georgia, right? Like, people
Mm-hmm.
reach out to me to share information or news or whatever the case may be in a way that they wouldn't other people. And I want that to be the center of politics instead of the, clickbaity headline, who can say the most inflammatory thing, who can stop the most bills, who can be the most, I don't know how to explain it, but essentially the idea was that we have so much power and we should be using it for good instead of for whatever it is we're trying to achieve for personal gain. And when I earlier we're talking about, being the first Muslim and how, but in general, being a state legislator to me is a huge honor, but it's a huge responsibility that I don't take lightly because now I can help people, right? That is my goal. And so when people come up and try to do, I don't know, whatever political win that day for their personal benefit, I'm like, there are people, and not to get like super serious on Maine kind of thing, but people who don't have access to healthcare that are dying due to preventative causes, right? There are children whose learning and social development has been hindered because of this global pandemic that don't know how to process their emotions and at the worst end of the spectrum are killing themselves, their colleagues or their peers or their teachers. And that doesn't happen. None of that is happening in a vacuum. But we as state legislators have a responsibility to address these serious issues because there's too much to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am enjoying this thoroughly, and I appreciate your insight and just digging deeper into that, because the next question, I'm like, oh, you are just flowing with me tonight.
Sorry,
I
don't mean to preempt all your questions.
You're flowing because, the next set of questions are going to be about your platform, what you're passionate about. And you've already kind of given us a little taste about, healthcare reform, education, right? Mental health. So I don't want to take away from your passion and your talking points. So tell us more about your platform and what you're passionate about.
When we developed my platform, I knew that it would be a sort of like anchor to what we were trying to do. I'm reaching for a charger because I just realized my phone is dying. But, it was meant to be an anchor for me because I knew once I got into the state legislature, things would get really crazy really fast. And that was by nature of what we were doing and the kind of work that comes towards us. And by the way, the amount of briefings that I get and like papers and stuff is too much. But at the time when I was running, it was putting public service back into politics mattered. And then I was like, what does that look like? It included making sure that every kid had access to high quality education, regardless of where they lived. Because at the end of the day, I went to public school all my life, but I also had incredible teachers. I did the IB program. My sister now has access to sort of like a hybrid IB program, dual enrollment kind of thing. Like every kid should have an opportunity for that kind of success. Bridging the economic opportunity gap, right? Absolutely, Georgia's the #1 place to do business, but what about the rest of us? Like, that's phenomenal for corporations and large business owners, and I'm happy for them. That's awesome. But what about the average everyday Georgian? What is their life like, and how can we make it better? And are we, for me, if we're gonna sell people access to the state, instead of, being okay with the lowest bidder, people need to start competing for our people. Yeah. It's time to start treating Georgia like a place that people should compete for rather than us trying to compete for their attention. And then on the healthcare side, we talk about this a lot, expanding Medicaid. We're literally leaving so much money on the table that we've already paid in taxes for political reasons, and it's absurd. And then, last but not least, I did my master's on voting rights. I know that sort of started to die down a little bit more, but sometimes processes can inadvertently or sometimes advertently leave certain people out, and so I'm always on the lookout for that. Now, the irony of, not ironically, but I will say, in a sign of good faith, everybody got one of their top 3 choices. One of my top 3 choices was actually energy and utilities and telecommunication, which is, I'm honored to be on that committee because now we get to talk about things like, why are people's rates so high and getting higher, and what are some things we could be doing better, or can we look at renewable energy? So it's like exciting, right. And always, how do we increase access is at the top of mind for me, always.
Okay. All right, awesome. We appreciate that. I promise our viewers, those who are joining us, and thank you everyone who's joined us tonight. I know a couple of people are coming in. So I like to leave the last 5 minutes for my guests just to tell their story, leave a lasting point with our viewers on your role as Georgia State Representative, or what you're in. Also, just what your plans are. Give us your vision. What are your plans for the next 2 years? We're not going to speak re-election on you. You may or may not want to do that, so we're not going to put that on you like the other journalists did. We'll see. But at least for the next 2 years, what's your vision? What's your plan for Gwinnett County and the state of Georgia overall?
I mean, to be clear, people invested a lot in my race. Re-election is absolutely fine with me. It was all the people that were like, you just became a state legislator. Are you running for president tomorrow? And I'm like, I literally wasn't even going to run to begin with. Like, please leave me alone.
I know. I've learned after interviewing so many elected officials.
So and I'm crazy.
Like, oh, the election plan. And they're like, I never said I was running for re-election. So that's why I said, well, I'm not going to.
This is my commitment. But here's what I want to leave people with. Absolutely, my election is exciting, but my election didn't happen in a vacuum, and I didn't do it alone. Like I said, there were people that helped me knock thousands of doors, make tons of phone calls, send so many texts, send out mail, you name it. It took a whole group of people to build a movement to get me in a place like the State House. But the work doesn't end there. And I really hope that people understand that this is the kind of local government at the city or the state level where you can have the most impact. And me as one person alone, especially in a minority party, especially as a freshman, I can only do so much. But at the end of the day, what I can be really effective is if I can bring more people to the table. So for those that are even remotely interested in politics or have an issue that they really care about or really value or whatever the case may be, come to the Capitol and advocate on that issue, because you will be surprised at both how much and how little we hear from constituents, but how much that sways us, because we know if somebody took the time to write about something, they care about it a lot. And so if I can leave people with one thing about me or my brand or whatever the case may be, is that I'm not as I'm not that cool and I'm not that much of a miracle worker, but I know that my strength is with everybody else coming to the table with me, and I hope that they will join me.
Oh, that's awesome. That is super awesome. You are absolutely so genuine, like an everyday citizen. And you're like, listen, I was just asked and supported, and here I am. So that is a beautiful, beautiful story. And I really appreciate your time this evening. Like you said, kicking us off for our first episode of in 2023. And this is our 14th episode of Politics Personified. So we appreciate you. Again, I know you have a busy schedule. We appreciate all the work that you're doing, that you're going to do. So you guys make sure that you follow Roa. She is on social media, on Instagram. She's on Facebook. Are you on Twitter as well?
I am. I'm on Twitter and I'm on TikTok. I've kind of ignored it for a little bit, but I need to get back into it. So
over TikTok. I said I'm gonna have to rebrand my TikTok. Yeah, it's a lot. But definitely make sure to support her, follow her, support her platform. She has a vision for Gwinnett County. She has a vision for the state of Georgia, and just overall for the Muslim community, which is commendable. So I commend this beautiful woman for taking a stand in her community and being a voice for so many people and setting an example that representation does matter. So again, thank you for being our special guest. Again, for those of you who just joined us, this is Politics Personified, presented by the Personified Group, and we wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you, Roa.
Thanks for having me. Have a great one.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye. Bye.